Hello, and welcome back to Office Hours for December 17th, 2020. I am not used to beginning an introduction without the sound of a synthesizer in the background, and so it's a little bit strange, but here I am. I'm your host, Walker Farrell, and this will definitely be the final Office Hours live stream for the epic year of 2020, which is also the first year we've done these live streams, and I hope that all of you have been enjoying them. Today, to close out the year, as it were, since next Thursday is Christmas Eve and the following will be New Year's Eve, we have very special guest. This is a person who probably has been one of the most influential on my own personal trajectory with synthesizers, and even in the fact of going in the direction that I ended up going in my life and my involvement with Make Noise. Back in the dark synthesizer ages of 2009, 2010, as far as things like YouTube videos, there really weren't many games in town, and James Cigler's videos were among the few that really just resonated with me and with a lot of people, and taught us a lot about how to think about synthesis and how to think about patching and how to think about listening. And I'd be lying if I said my early videos weren't basically a ripoff of James's style. So and now James has come out with this lovely Patch the Card game, which we played on the Office Hours last week. And so it is an honor to have James Cigler here with us today. And I think there he is. And he's muted. Hi, James. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for that intro. I'm honored to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you, man. So it seems like the Patch the Card game has been a pretty big hit.
Yeah, I honestly did not anticipate the demand. I had a small test print to check out the boxes and everything, and I thought, okay, probably knock off a couple of these right off the bat, and then maybe a few, couple sales a week or something. And I already had a big print on order, but no, I mean, everything sold out. The first 70 or so sold out in 24 hours. We've got some outreach from dealers and distributors. So just starting to get, like, my basement corner here is now full of boxes. I was able to get everyone who pre-ordered in the US, thank you so much. Yours are in the mail. We're getting stuff out to dealers and distributors right now. Yeah, it's been awesome. I'm really excited.
That's really cool. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, and I know that we had some people see our live stream last week and just go order it immediately, which is certainly what I would have done.
Yeah, thanks to those folks too.
Yeah. So the one thing I was thinking about with regard to this game is, like, it really stretches the idea of the word game, I would say.
Yeah, and the game thing kind of came from, like, I couldn't think of a better thing to call it. I mean, when I was coming up with this idea, it was really for myself and to kind of push my boundaries and challenge and get me kind of out of these, like, I like to call them paths, just because rut feels very negative, and they're not always negative things, but it's just kind of like you're going on this walk through the forest, and you're kind of always walking this way. You need to get to some spot. I know the way. I'm going to just keep kind of going that way, and maybe you branch off a little bit. But then I would, hang out with other people, especially like if we'd have gatherings, we'd all bring our system and watch other people patch mine and do things that, like, I never do that, or like, and I was like, oh, I'm not taking journeys that other people are just thinking to make, and how do I make a choice that I don't think to make? And slowly over time, I kind of thought of this idea of cards. I really like playing cards. I always like card games. And so it's really like a practice / patching tool. But I wanted it to be fun, and it kind of is easier to just call it a game than to, do what I just did and spend like 2 minutes trying to explain why you would use cards with a modular synthesizer.
Yeah, right. Well, what you were saying just kind of made me think. You were talking about a path through the woods. It was making me think of. I was remembering that a dog that I had when I was younger back when I was a kid and lived with my parents. We had a dog, and we would take her for a walk, and it followed the same path every day. And one time I said, "Hey, Sally, you choose the path now. You walk wherever you want. I'll follow wherever you go." Obviously, she didn't understand what I was saying. I did no guidance whatsoever, and she followed the exact same path that she always did, and she even started to slow down as we got closer to the house. Like, oh, great! Do we really have to go home?
Yeah, it's going to be over.
And I mean, a dog on a walk is a little different from a person patching a synth, but the same thing happens to me too. I don't even realize that there are certain paths that are just ingrained in me that I didn't realize.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it too was like I started to realize using the cards and kind of playing this game would start to show you those things too. Mm-hmm. I think it's actually the card number 1 is patch without listening, and that's one of the ones out of all of them that'll really show you those paths the most. Those things are like you're just going on muscle memory and not listening.
Yeah, patch without listening was I was on another live stream last week with Travarsi and B-Boy Tech Report where they had to do some Morphogene patches. And I made a patch where I decided I'd pull an abstraction card to make it.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
It was indeed patch without listening. So it was almost like a scary, like walking a tightrope somewhere. I mean, even though it wasn't, I actually was pre-recording the patch, but I just decided to go for it. And I patched without listening and made something that I think wasn't terrible, but it was a fun kind of, I don't know. There was some safety stuff taken away there.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I
think that card like really wants to get out there because I think you drew it in the office hours last week, right? And you were like, "This isn't going to work."
Right. I decided that for live patching, maybe it wasn't going to work quite as well.
And when Tim and I played on PodMod, we drew that first too. So I think there must be something in the ether that.
Yeah, it's a card that wants to be drawn.
Yeah,
over the top of the deck, like the One Ring or something like
that.
Yes,
yeah.
I want to mention real quick because I forgot to mention this up at the top that if people have questions, they should post them in the comments. And Pete, our good buddy Pete, is on hand to feed those to us, and we'll respond to those throughout the live stream instead of holding them all to the end. So. Please let your questions flow freely if you have questions for James. Paul Ziemba says, sort of like oblique strategies, but for synths.
Yeah, kind of.
An inevitable question.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's familiar with those, it was Brian Eno and somebody else. They're these kind of like, to me, they were always like a little too oblique. Like sometimes they were specific, but they left a lot open to interpretation of like what that meant to you. Which was fine, but when I was developing this, I was like, it needs to be this perfect blend of specific, like do this action, but also generic enough that it isn't like patch this particular type of signal to this particular type of thing.
Because it has to work with any synth.
Right. Yep. Like any, and in fact, it does kind of work. It's a real stretch to do it with a fixed architecture synth. Like if it has a big mod matrix, you can kind of do it, but it's tedious and it's definitely not as fun. Definitely anything that's patchable is workable. I've done it with no coast.
So you consider a non-patchable synth to be a synth?
Yeah, we'll leave it in there. So I wanted it to work with any module. In fact, in the very early parts of the sort of design, when I was still doing it for myself, a lot of the ideas were like, clock the system from an end of cycle output of an envelope, or things like that. Sure. And then as that sort of moved into cards and this thing started to evolve, it was like, this is too specific. If the card shows up again, it doesn't make any sense. If it shows up later, it feels too cumbersome because you have to like really tear a bunch of stuff down to suddenly make that work. And it just, I don't know, it didn't quite. And then it was like, when it started to be like, hey, someone could use this, I could make this and people could really enjoy and benefit from it. Then it also was like, well, if someone doesn't have a module that does that, they're just going to be stumped or it's a dead card. Or
Sure. You can assume that every module, or most of them, have knobs you can turn up, and you probably have a clock in your system somewhere.
You've got some kind of input, whether it's an audio input or a modulation input. So it became like determining this language to be just input, or just connection is what I use most of the time. I'm getting way off the track of Paul's answer, but yes, that's probably the shortest elevator pitch if someone knows what oblique strategies is. Yeah, although for me, the actions are much more specific. It's
Oblique
rather than
strategies are quite oblique. I mean, I think they're supposed to apply to basically anything that you're doing.
Almost, yeah, like any kind of artistic thing. I think it's definitely music leaning, but there's a lot that you could interpret for any kind of art.
Yeah. So when you do you have an example of a card you used that didn't make the cut?
Yeah, let me see, because there's some for volume 2 that were not necessarily not good enough, but sort of I wanted the first volume to not be terribly complicated, more straightforward, and just sort of like easier to approach. So I'm trying to think of some. I mean, definitely ones that evolved and just didn't work right were, again, ones where it was like, like I had this concept of like sort of inspirational cards that I think I just sort of cut out completely. But it was like FM drum patch. So it was like, all right, you're going to make a percussive type patch and you're going to use FM synthesis. And the abstraction cards kind of evolved around that sort of concept. But anyway, when I was doing those and I would patch and play, I still found as like, this is really just making me go back to these paths of like, okay, well, this is kind of how I make an F. It was always like, all right, well, here's the envelope to the pitch input, and here's, at least one operator of FM. And it really didn't feel like it was pushing my boundaries. And I had, I think, 5 or 6 of them. And then after maybe about a month of like play testing where I'd play once or twice a day, it's like I'm getting this all the time. Like it's not fun to always be forced to patch a FM. And then I just felt like I'm not exploring, the whole sound and functionality of the modular. I'm just, doing these few things that I don't normally do often.
I could see something like if you get, say, like, make an acid bass line or something like that.
Right.
You're gonna, if you come up with that one more than once in a game, it's gonna be, you're definitely gonna, even if you didn't have that path already, you're gonna develop that path from playing the game a bunch.
Right. And then it was like, it was very clear that it had limited sort of lifespan. So like, I really wanted it to be where like you could play this game multiple times a day for months, and it's not going to feel the same every time. So that one definitely had this very limited lifespan. And then the other thing was like I designed those inspirations about stuff I feel like I didn't do often enough that I saw other people do and I really liked. So I realized like, well, those are just mine. Someone else is going to have a whole bunch of different ones. So
yeah, it's a good point.
So
I think a thing that I really like about the way the actual cards that you ended up with is, if somebody's really into patching FM drums, guilty as charged, they may make their patch based around FM drums anyway.
Sure.
But they're gonna break it off into new areas with this, so the patch is still gonna be theirs at the core, even if they pull an abstraction card that says, use every cable you can or whatever. It's still gonna be them making that patch from their perspective, and then together with the game, they're gonna break it apart, which is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to go for, is this combination of like set someone just slightly out of their comfort zone or off their path, and then, intercept kind of like where they'd be making choices for what they patch. And then, should they choose to have the cards let them, decide, you can do that, or you can just keep, doing it, whatever, making your executive decisions, and doing it on your own.
I've been impressed by just how extreme the disruptions are. Like, they really don't mess around. If you pull a disruption card, you're likely to completely change your patch.
Yeah, in fact, I guess that's another one. Going back to like how some of the stuff changed, I started to get a little worried that sometimes they were too disruptive, at least for some of them. But it is fun when it happens, and some of those, as much as it can kind of like knock you off what you were maybe trying to do, the finding your way back is very, very like educational and enlightening. It can sometimes be challenging and tough, but it's a good challenge if you're open to it.
Yeah.
And it was those where I really like learned the most about like really exploring and doing stuff that was out of my comfort zone, and not going back to this like idea of like, oh, well, you do this, or like, oh, I'm in this scenario, this is what I should patch, or like this input is supposed to take, this type of signal, which to me was always this weird thing that would get planted in my head, because I knew most things, it's just voltage. It's just the shape of the voltage that determines what we call a gate signal versus, an envelope, or a pitch signal.
Yeah.
So to kind of keep thinking like gate inputs, only gate signals go here, or only modulation signals go here, is kind of like a really limiting like concept to embed. It makes sense when you're trying to learn such a complicated system, but then over time, it's really putting you in a box or forcing you down these paths.
Yeah. So we have another question. And this is kind of the inverse of a question I asked a minute ago. Any ideas for a fun card that wasn't in the first generation of the game? That Chris Walker has asked that question.
Fun card that is in the first generation without giving away. On
that note, you mentioned that you wanted the first or volume, I guess would be what we're saying, to be kind of simple. Is the second one supposed to be an add-on, or is it also going to be standalone, or do you know yet?
The second one you could play standalone. It would work. I think it would feel a little incomplete.
Okay.
So it definitely, Volume 2 kind of completes Volume 1 in what was my like vision of how this should all work. Like if you've noticed, there's a purple dot on the box. So that is the fourth card type, which gets introduced in Volume 2. So there's a different sort of dimension and dynamic that this adds.
Shadowing.
Yes.
Lore bomb. Okay.
So Volume 2 will round it out, and if everything keeps going well, I hope to do a 3 and a 4, which will be more like just classic expansion packs. So just more cards of the existing types with just different actions and stuff. So ideas for a fun card that wasn't in the first, without giving away what was in the second.
You might not be able to answer that one.
I guess I could give away. So one that's been really fun, that I think I feel okay giving away just because it was such a fun one, and it is in Volume 2. It's a disruption card, just because we were talking about it. It's turn your system off and back on again without saving.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that one's been a really fun one. Because it works across a lot of things. I suppose if like your system is entirely analog, there's no digital module whatsoever, it may do nothing. But like even in a system where I kind of lean more heavily on strictly analog stuff for no particular reason. But I've got some of the maths that the 2013 first rev maths that start cycling when you reboot a power cycle. So like even something like that will like introduce a change. But so that's one that was originally in the first set, but I decided, and I don't remember why, that I was going to move it to the second one.
That's a good disruption. I mean, I feel like that's something that, at least for me, I take it for granted that it's not, that if I flip that power off, I'm not getting the same thing that I had when I turned it back on.
It's definitely really fun. Like actually just last night I posted a clip to Instagram where me and the kids were patching, and I was just trying to make just some, whatever music, just some techno or something so they could dance. And we had dinner or whatever. Yesterday I came down and turned it on, and I don't know if I changed the tempo, but certainly like everything was power cycled. So whatever sequence was in Rene 2, changed. And suddenly it was like way different and way better than what we left the other night. So there's that aspect of it too.
Yeah. So Steve Krukeru says, I feel like I patch better before I understand a module.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. In fact, one of the biggest inspirations for me with starting to make this thing for myself was when I first got into modular, I knew just enough about, audio pads and certainly the purpose of CV and what it was and how analog signals work. But I never used modulars before other than like the Nord modular. And it was always like this big blank canvas. I had very little paths. It was just always a wander through the forest to keep, hammering on this metaphor. And I wanted to get back to that, to where it was like, every time I sit down at this, how can I approach this as if I don't know what this stuff does? And it was really hard, like to sit down and go like, I don't know what this does. You start to just go like, okay, well, I have to just do what I haven't done in the past. And it's even that is like really difficult to do. You kind of force yourself to make like an anti decision. And then you do that and go like, oh, that was kind of weird. And then you kind of stop doing it. The framework of the game and just being like, I'm going to follow what this thing is telling me to do makes that whole thing easier to me. Yeah.
There's a section in a book I no longer have, regrettably, that Complete Guide to Synthesizers by Devarahi from the 70s, which has a bunch of patches for 2600s and stuff.
Oh, and really?
One section in there where he talks about patching with the beginner's mind, which I think may be a Zen concept or something like that. And it's,
I think so.
And it's a matter, and he discusses this sort of like way to find a balance between like having developed your technical knowledge enough not to be thinking about what you're patching about, and then bring the same mindset that you had when you were first starting in order to get yourself into places that you didn't, that weren't ruts. But it didn't have like so much of a specific strategy for it as like cards.
Just to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that was a really cool book that I wish I had on my bookshelf when I made.
What was it called again? Do you remember?
It's called The Complete Guide to Synthesizers. The author's name was Devarahi, Devarahi.
Oh, okay.
And it's it's long out of print. It was easier to come by than the Alan Strange book when I was early in my.
I know. Seriously, like even now, like to try and get this guy, I've had it as this sort of like in the back of my mind project is to find, whoever owns these publishing rights and stuff and try and convince them to like make an updated run, whether it's just, maybe a little bit more durable. Like I'm always worried about like the thing just getting a fold in it or something.
Well, that's actually happening. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, really? No, that's awesome.
There's a person who's I want to say it's a professor or somebody like that who's been in contact with Pat Strange, who is Alan Strange's partner.
Oh, okay.
He has given them the blessing to go ahead with it.
Oh, fantastic!
And awesome. I think there will be a Kickstarter up for it. I think it's been delayed because of various 2020 reasons, but
sure.
It was originally supposed to be going live before the end of this year. So
that's awesome.
It should be pretty soon. So
it's such a fantastic book that it really should just be in the hands of more people.
Yeah. I've managed to come across a few copies of it over the years. I've been very diligent. Like when I got my own copy that I have. Everybody's got to show their copy.
No, right?
And then I found one that I donated to the Synth Library up in Portland.
Oh, awesome!
And then I also have a copy that turned out to be more of a PDF printout.
Yep.
That was fine, but I use that as like my actual copy
every day.
So that I don't mess up the older copy as much. I don't know. It's a rare.
That's
book.
what I would do too. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that got us off track for a minute. So here's another question from Chris Walker. What's the most silly but effective move that the game made you do thus far?
I definitely think like it wasn't silly, but I've learned a lot from the audio as clock. And actually I've learned a lot from, again, how other people interpret even the kind of generalized specific things that I wrote on these cards. Like when I did audio as clock, what was in my mind was using like, like a drum loop or something, like the actual audio and putting that into a clock input. Because you're going to get these sort of weird, aperiodic synchronizations of when the waveform crosses over 0 or whatever the module's, threshold is for detecting a trigger.
Right.
And you'll get these like weird bursty things. And then that gives you this challenge of like, do I like it as that? Do I need to maybe attenuate it? Do I need to do something to condition that signal to make it more of a steady clock or whatever? But just doing it more as like just taking an oscillator and clocking things like sequencers and trigger sequencers at audio rate, and then using the resulting signal somehow taught me a lot more. Like I just really didn't do that much. I've certainly done the clock a sequencer at audio rate and use it to kind of make a wave table kind of trick, but not to where I'm using the end result as other audio to process.
So it's interesting you say that. You were saying that you were assuming you'd be doing something like a drum loop, which was interesting to me because the moment I heard audio as clock, I just automatically went to using an oscillator output, and that obviously a drum loop is also audio. But I think that's a path that's in my mind that even
Yeah.
transcended the game because I was like, okay, what are my waveform outputs? That was what I was thinking of as audio.
Yeah, sure.
So having different people's interpretation available to you somehow is kind of cool too.
Yeah, and I mean, I wanted to bake not that specifically, but a level of that into the cards to where it isn't. There is some level of interpretation and sort of artistic decision making, even to if you're going to follow the card. Like I've tried to tell people too, like if you draw a card and you just hate that, or let's say there's a card you just hate altogether, whatever it is, like there's a modulate the clock rate. So let's say, the way you make music is, you're syncing your modular to Ableton and, it's MIDI clock. It's always synchronized. You just hate this card that you get modulate the clock rate. Just take it out of the deck and put it aside, put it back in the box. Don't use it. That's fine. I wanted to make sure that nothing breaks the game if you play it differently, if you take cards out, if you just ignore cards. And that was kind of like a challenge. Like, if people are going to understand it's a game that doesn't really have rules, because games need to have rules. I feel like I'm bouncing around a lot, but where was I going with that? Oh yeah, open people's interpretation of like what to do with the cards. I try to make it specific, but I think it's cool when people are, following it, but maybe doing it a little bit differently than I anticipated.
Yeah. It's I kind of like, it was cool to listen to you and Tim on Modular Modcast playing it together because you could hear the differing interpretations. I feel like I'm thinking since partially because everything we do is single player right now, but I'm thinking this is player as a single player thing, but this could be really fun to play together with other people.
Yeah, and I mean, it was probably like 2 years ago that I first started with this idea of like this I should make this as cards, and this could be useful for more than just me. Mm-hmm. And obviously that was all pre-COVID, and in my mind I had this idea that people would get together and play it together. So there was always this multiplayer idea in my head that the game should be able to be played multiplayer, even though I've expected most of the time people to use it on their own.
Right. So actually, when you were developing it, we had a copy that was handwritten.
Yes.
Instructions, and I took it to the holiday party for Make Noise, and we all took turns making the patches on it and just destroying the patch.
That's awesome.
And that was my first experience with the game, was to play it with my coworkers.
Good, because that's kind of what I always envisioned. Like it's always been so much fun to hang out with other people with modulars and just talk about it and patch and just learn from each other. But then also I feel like one of the things that I've loved the most about modular is just the community around it, that people are teaching each other. Like, everyone's sort of learning and growing with this thing collectively, whether it's through forums or like synth meets, modular on the spot. Mm-hmm. That's always like one of those things that's always kept me very connected to the community, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So I always wanted to kind of have that, like the card should be able to kind of fit in that somehow. There could be. I imagined like when stores carry it, stores could like have events where people come together and maybe do. There's a game variant I made up called Patch Battle Royale, which is sort of like a multiplayer versus kind of who's going to make the best patch, but all sharing more or less the same abstractions. And each player has kind of their own hand, like a poker deck. And every interval, when it's time to play a card, you can either play the card on yourself, or you can pick someone else that has to do that card. And to kind of like get a little bit of competition in there. But then at the end, it's just kind of like,
that could be an event. That could be a night. You could be a night out of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And just sort of fun stuff like that. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering back in the day, so there was definitely some inspiration there, because those shops do that like every Friday. They have little tournaments and there's prizes and so I always had this community multiplayer kind of thing in mind.
Nice. I like that. So yeah, like more on the note of community, like and how knowledge is shared among the community. This feels more and more to me like like I feel an extension or a lineage of what you had done with videos back in the day, which was a big resource for the community. I wanted to ask a little bit about like what it was like at that time being part of this smaller scene at the time, and also what got you going with making videos and stuff in the first place.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was really cool. I mean, there was, I think I remember how I found the Muffs forum. It was very early. I think I was one of maybe 11 people on there who had Eurorack. Like there was way more Blasset, Frac Rack. If Frac Rack is even still like a thing. There was a couple guys with Surge systems on there. There was a little bit of like DIY stuff, but there wasn't even sub forums yet. Like I don't think we didn't have a Euro sub forum for a while.
Yeah.
So it was really cool, and I started doing the videos just because there started to be more Euro manufacturers coming on the scene. Like this is when like Plan B and Livewire. This was like the NAM after they sort of like introduced like their first showing, and Analog Haven started carrying them.
Well, that like 08?
I think it might have been either late 06 or early 07, because I think my YouTube account is 07, and the first couple of videos I did I had on Vimeo.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like the Vimeo player at that time was very buggy and didn't work with all the browsers, and I thought like I'll just put it on YouTube. Like at that time YouTube wasn't really that much of a thing. It was just it'll host the videos and I don't have to pay for them, you know. Like at that time I could have put them on a server. I knew how to do all that stuff, but it was like and they were really just like other people on the forum were like, how does this Vulcan modulator work? What is this? And I had kind of figured it out. So I was like, oh, I'll make a video and show it. And I think with the dual lope, the Plan B Model 13, I think I did like kind of a video on, I'm trying to remember what the first one was. The first video might have been the quad envelope, dope for quad envelope, and the low pass gate, dual low pass gate together. But yeah, it was really just about like supplying a video manual when the manual didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
And
right.
Then
there were barely any manuals at that time either.
Yeah, like none of the Livewire stuff had manuals. I think a couple of the Plan B modules had like patch examples, but they didn't really explain what the controls did. And I certainly gravitated towards modules that weren't just like, you know, frequency, CV input. They had kind of, you know, creative names and stuff. So that didn't make it any easier for people to figure out like what those controls did or what the inputs did.
That's interesting to me, because I remember that. I mean, I got the impression that you just like knew everything. I remember like, and you did one on the IntelliGel flip flop, for example.
Yes.
And you did this explanation of how a flip flop works and what these different types of flip flops are, and I was like, how would I have ever? There's no way I would have known that if I hadn't seen you showing, like you had a light switch metaphor.
Yes. Yeah.
Just made it all very clear to me, and I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about.
I mean, I don't. I think I do a really good job of like, you know, seeming like I really know. Definitely one strength I know I've always had is because I've had to do it, like listening to smart people talk about really complicated things, I've been able to kind of turn it into an analogy that I understand so that I get what they're talking about. Usually that's right. Sometimes it's off, but usually it's on target enough. And then being able to use that same analogy and describe it to somebody else. Because it's kind of like, okay, well, if I've been able to translate that into, you know, my sort of understanding, and I could do the same thing. So like the flip-flop, I'd kind of already understood the purpose of flip-flops from like looking into CMOS stuff for a while. I was super into these Lunetta synths, which are just like patchable, usually all banana, based on CMOS chips. So you're just taking like, you know, gates and making them self-oscillate, and that makes square waves, and you can make filters through just, you know, VCA chips and resistors, yada, yada, yada. So I'd kind of already been aware of what a flip-flop did, and I didn't really think about it in that context. And it was the tip-top Z8000. I really wanted the direction to kind of be latching, but because it just follows like gate high, it goes forward or whatever.
Yeah.
And
that was my first Eurorack module.
Was it? Nice.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, Gur was like, "You just need a flip-flop module." I was like, "Well, no one makes a flip-flop module." And I think I went on Muffs or something, and Daniel messaged me and said, like, I think I could make that. Um,
Oh,
so so when that came out, I was like, yeah, dude, send it to me. Like, I'll explain it. Like, this is such a useful tool, especially like as more modules came out where it was like you need to turn some signal into a gate or have a way to just like keep a gate high without you holding something or
yeah.
whatever.
So I wonder. I mean, partially this is probably due to what the scene was at that time, and how maybe it had like the roots, the DIY roots were much closer to the DIY kind of roots of synthesis at that time.
Yeah.
Like I got this sense from your videos as well as from what was being discussed on forums at the time of like sort of coming up with ideas and then using like connecting these concepts together to realize the idea in a way that was not really aimed at a musical result necessarily. Even it was almost more just like figuring out what happens and then seeing where it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was that sort of really early, like fertile ground of like, what does this do? What can I do with it? And like, what does it sound like? I mean, especially in those early videos, and pretty much all the videos, I never tried to like impress upon anyone the musicality of anything or like, look at how cool this sounds. Because to me, it's like, that's up to you to like, not you, but the whoever's buying this thing to determine like if they can make cool sounds with it or whatever. I just want people to understand what it's capable of. And obviously I tried to make it sound good because, I didn't want people to approach and go like, that sounds terrible. This is something I don't want because that's too early of like a judgment. So.
I think you made the right choice there because not only were you getting across those concepts, but it was almost like the sound that was generally very good and like kind of hypnotic almost. I found in those videos was speaking for itself through the circuit concepts that were describing. And I don't know. I mean, it was heavily influential on the way that I have aimed to make videos as well. Because what I want to talk about is not necessarily what the sound is, but I do want the sound to be something that people can sink into and nod into on its own, while also thinking about the way that things are connecting and the concepts.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm super stoked and honored that I may have,
I mean, there were probably like many nights back in 2009, 2010 when I used to work restaurants and I would work late. I'd come home at like midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I would go patch, and sometimes I would just like watch videos and listen to what other people were doing. And I remember a couple times where I basically fell asleep to the 101, 201, 301 videos because they were just hypnotic. It was like, oh look, and it was just like we weren't going, how do you make techno with this, or how do you make whatever type of music or this melody? It was more like, look what happens when I touch these things, and here's how they interact. But almost coincidentally, it sounded fantastic and just dragged me into it.
It could have put you to sleep from the like really shaky, crappy camera I had at that point. Like,
I don't need to put me to sleep so much. It's just that I was sort of like hypnotized by it. So
it's funny too. Like a lot of people have approached me over the years, like the interesting stuff from those Renee videos, and it's funny because those came out of beta testing that Renee, like coming up with these scenarios of like, well, I need to figure out these things to make sure that if someone maybe did it, it's not going to break or have a bug or something. So 50-60% of those things are things I never really do or did with Renee, like musically or my own playing with it. It was coming up with sort of test cases or like, if you apply this signal or this combination of modes, does it do, what's it's supposed to do, or does it do something unexpected? I mean, I feel like the one I get comments about most was MPC mode.
Right.
And I remember talking to Tony about that, and he's all, what? And in my mind, just seeing that grid, that's immediately what I thought of. Like the 4x4 is like I immediately thought of an MPC. And I was, playing around with it, and I don't know what signal I had into the gate input, but just sort of noticed that like, oh, when I push the pad, that signal gets let through. If I just supply an offset there, it's going to make a gate, and it's going to be like a, touchpad. And it was just really funny that thing that was never really intended to do that was such a like, approachable thing for so many people. Like, hey, you got this thing now. Look, you could at least start with this. And it's still kind of one of the main ways I use it. Like just playing it.
I think a lot of people do with the original Renee still,
Yeah.
MPC as you call it mode. I've definitely found that to be the case too when I was working on development with modules here. Like that'll to find stuff that doesn't work will lead me into lots of stuff that does work. And give me ideas that sometimes are even like, hey, oh, actually, what if this was just a little bit different like this? And then we kind of massage it into being, and it's really fun.
That concept informed a lot of like my design on the cards too. Again, thinking about like keeping the actions specific but also really generic, and that it's being left open to, doing that action in different ways, so that hopefully people do something that I don't expect or anticipate it to do. Same thing with like keeping it so you could play and use the cards in any way that you want. Like I had a basic game that I include on a little instruction card in the deck. And then on patchtcg.com, I have a ways to play page that I keep updating.
Oh, cool.
So I really hope that like as the cards get into people's hands, they start to share like their way of playing it, because I really want that to just be, that could be useful to anyone in whatever capacity they want to integrate it in their patching.
Yeah, it'd be cool to have like a community repository of like game types or modes.
I think if it gets that, like the influx starts to come that fast to where like I can't update just people emailing me stuff, I think that's what I'll do, is just make a Discord or make some kind of just a forum page or something and go post your ideas here and just pin the really good ones.
Somebody asks, Pablo German Gomez, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, it's hard to understand modular sometimes. How was the visual language design decided for the cards?
That's a great question. From the beginning, I wanted to use a consistent language with all the cards. So using the word connection or input or output, and just be like very consistent with that. So the wording is less floral and more like mechanical, but that's so that it's consistent. And originally in my mind, I thought, again, inspiration from Magic the Gathering, I wanted people to eventually, once they've played it a few times, they don't have to read it. They can just see the icon and know that's what I do. Like that's the, pick up
an example here.
Right. So like that's the use all the cables that, that you can, or that's the flip a coin and unpatch select a connection, flip a coin, unpatch if it's heads. Exactly. No modulations, just use your hands. So that was the start of it. And I originally thought, okay, I've got this consistent language. I approached Nathan Moody, who I've known for a while, and he's had years of experience as a UI and interaction designer. So I was like, this will be perfect. Thankfully, he said yes, because I don't know who I would have approached if he said no. And I said, I think we should just have like 3 icons on each card. And there's like, an icon for the action of unpatch, for example, and there's an icon for a flip a coin. So you put 3 of them together and you'll just know what to do. And he said, I think I can make a unique icon for each card. I was like, dude, that's like 25, maybe more if we keep doing. It's like, oh, no, that's fine. And yeah, he nailed it. So like the actual interpretation visually was all Nathan. There was only a couple where we kind of refined it after the fact. Almost all of those were like his first attempt or whatever.
There really is a consistency to the design. I mean, they all look like they're in the same mode, and they show exactly what the concept is.
Yeah, and you can see he tried to keep that, so it's like, there's not too many different looks of the module. The arrows tend to be very informative. There's not a lot of like it looks good, but it's not being excessive with its sort of artisticness. So it's very, I'm failing to think of the word, but it's clean and it's clear, but still being like very cool looking.
It's well designed. I think that's
yes.
That, to me, that seems like that'd be the word to that. Yeah, and I want to mention too, since Nathan Moody did this, he also made a Morphogene reel for us, so you can get on Freesound out of these handmade instruments that he made. These handmade acoustic instruments that he recorded, and they make great fodder for the Morphogene. So for anyone who's watching, they should go check.
Nathan is like the quintuple threat, like mastering, sound design, visual design,
the stop motion animation that he does. I don't know if
animation, pretty much almost any visual art.
it's amazing. It's really kind of creepy sometimes, but very, very good. Okay, Chris Walker asks, which color did James prefer in Magic? You're getting out of my wheelhouse here, but
yeah, I mean, it was definitely black. Like, always leaned heavily black. um, Definitely blue though. A lot of blue, black and blue. Some whites. The variant I really liked playing was called EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander. It was a really interesting concept where you put together a deck of 100 cards, which is almost twice what a normal one would be. And there's only one copy of any card. And then you have this kind of like one super card that's your dragon or whatever. That's where the Highlander comes in. And it was a multiplayer game. And it would always start off where, and the thing was like people would build these ridiculous decks and there was like almost no banned cards. And the cards could go back many years. Whereas like if you were playing sort of normal Magic, you're usually limited to like the most recent 3 sets or something. So you had this gigantic like library of cards you could go back to. You'd see all kinds of crazy cards if you're playing with people that they've been collecting. And it was really fun because the game started out not very competitive. You could have like 6 to 8 people playing and just like weird stuff's happening. One, because there's like a weird collection of cards, there's 8 people playing. And then at some point, someone does something that like makes someone else mad, and then like teams start happening, or like that guy starts to get attacked a bunch, and just it was just very dynamic.
Or something.
Yeah, and it was just so much fun, and every time you play was like super different. So there was a lot of inspiration from that went into the design of these. But that was a long answer to a short question.
We had another one that was a little ways back, but I wanted to get to too. Cinematic Laboratory asked, in regard to the system that we see in the background there, how do you manage such a big rig with so many options and no limitations? Is the card game?
Well, that was sort of like, having this many was sort of, what's the word? Like it went hand in hand with that kind of problem. When I got these cases, it was kind of like I had so many of these in boxes. Like they're modules I liked enough that I didn't want to get rid of, or it's not like they were going to really net me any kind of like money. It wasn't worth getting rid of them. So I'd have them in a box. So I wasn't using them. So there was that limitation. But then over time, it was like, oh, I'd like to play with that module again. I don't know if it's worth digging out, rearranging a case. So I was like, I'm just going to get a big case eventually. But I would start to do things that eventually made it into the cards, like use half the modules chosen at random. I wouldn't be that specific, but I kind of just go like, all right, I'm just going to use these ones. Or where some of the like choosing thing came from is like, oh, I'm just going to use a couple modules, and I would kind of just close my eyes and put my hands out, and whatever modules my fingers touched, I'd use those. Or throw cables, like just take like 3 or 4 cables and throw them, and whatever they were touching, I was like, these are the modules that are going to get used. And
you mentioned throwing cards at the system when we were doing it last week. I ended up throwing cards in a few places to find which module to do the thing to.
Yep. Yeah. That's a fun one. I think if anyone really likes that one, maybe get card sleeves, because definitely like as you keep throwing them, they get nicks in them. But if you don't mind a little wear and tear, like just keep at it. But card sleeves.
I've never heard of card sleeves. I generally have only played like basically euchre, that Midwestern card. Like
okay, yeah. I think maybe I should put together like a tips or some kind of like page. Like anyone who's been into card games like was familiar with. They're just basically like plastic sleeves. They're usually clear on both sides or like a solid color on the back.
I'm picturing that you keep comic books in and like
kind of
and stuff. Yeah,
just a little stiffer. I mean, a lot of card games are printed on cheaper cardstock than I chose, which what I chose was more like what you'd find on like a casino poker deck.
These are really, I gotta say, these are really nice. I've sometimes bought a deck of like poker cards at a gas station or something, and they're terrible. Like these slide across each other the way I expect a deck of cards to. So I appreciate that you went all the way on that.
Yeah, I did. I actually did a lot of like testing around the sort of feel. I talked to like some friends, even my nephew, like which of these two do you like to feel? Like close your eyes and I want you to feel these two. And wear testing too. Like I just kept a deck in my bag all the time to see what would happen them rubbing together. I played them on a lot of different surfaces. And like
make sure the colors don't start like rubbing.
Just how quick it wears off, and the cheaper cardstock and stuff, it just wore out too fast.
There's clearly there's got to be some kind of lamination or something at
I
least
forget.
a little bit of it. I mean, it's
I forget what it is. They do a couple of things. So there's like a slight dimpling on there, which helps with the air in between, and that's what makes them slide easier. And then there's this coating. In fact, there's a glossier coating that I really liked. It made the colors pop a little bit more. It was actually a little more resistant to like water and spillage and stuff. The only problem is it's super reflective. So I tried it in like a bunch of different lighting scenarios, and anything that was even just slightly not great light, like lit from above, or it's bright, or like can lighting that's in most houses, all you saw was like the light coming back at you. So I was like, well, that kind of ruins it. So this was the best sort of compromise of like really nice pro finish, not too reflective, keeps the colors looking nice and good.
Yeah, it's worked, and it did with direct stage lighting for our stream last week. It worked just great. So
awesome. That's definitely a thing I thought about, was like lighting from the top. People making YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's back to the big system. I mean, whenever I usually just use at most 2 7U cases at once, and usually just one. Because I found that when I have stuff in a really big case like that, or whenever I've encountered a big case like that and have been kind of tasked with patching on it, I feel like I'm lost at sea a little bit. I mean, I'm looking at, it must be like 6 or 7 feet from the top corner to the very bottom corner. You must have some insanely long patch cables going on.
Yeah, so I have a lot of stackables. So what I'll do is just make a long cable connecting two stackables together. Because I don't know, I've always been very OCD about cable length for no specific reason other than maybe it's just cumbersome or whatever, or it's just easier for my eye to track a patch if I'm not like, following it through a bunch of cables. But the other thing is, a lot of my system is designed around like voices. Well, actually, no, I won't say design. It's just kind of how it worked out. So, if I were to have like a big patch set up with this and we were to look at it, you'd see it's like, all right, here's one voice that's kind of like, its own little system. And then there's another voice that's patched. So there might be like 4 not really elaborate patches as voices all together that then get mixed. And then I'm like performing just a balance between those voices. A lot of times it's just one sequencer talking to all 4 voices. And I've just, tuned them to intervals or something, and I'm blending those intervals together. So that's one way too. It's not like I always approach it as like trying to use all of them, or I end up making like I often don't make that complicated the patches. I also just really like doing a lot of things manually too. So the more complicated, the more easy it is for me to kind of get lost and like, wait, where's the knob that's going to do the thing I wanted it to do?
I guess it's kind of like having a full bar. You don't have to make some kind of ridiculous Long Island iced tea every single time.
Yeah, exactly.
You play live too, or at least in the days we're playing live.
Yeah.
You have like a separate rig for live?
Yeah, I have. Let's see if I lean this way. Yeah, so I fell in love with the sub-modular cases just because they're so thin. There is the problem, obviously, like any module that's even remotely deep might not fit.
Right.
They have the make noise boards in them, and they actually offset them. So like one of the rows can go to full depth, and the other row's got a board. So like I have one case technically turned upside down for some deeper modules to fit there. So the power supply board is here.
Oh, I see.
Like Renee and the like really thin modules are all down here. But I really like those. They have like a donut, so you can patch them together and they'll fit in one big case. So, but yeah, I like performing with just like a 2-row or 3-row like the CD bus case. This one could work, but to me, like once I kind of get this size, it starts to get a lot to manage performance wise.
Yeah.
Unless like a chunk of it is kind of like playing presets or something, but I generally like to like almost fully improvise when I'm, performing. So having a smaller system where I know what's going on is a lot easier. I don't get lost.
Yeah. Do you patch on the spot, or do you patch before?
I was starting to do that more towards the end because that was something that always kind of half terrified me because I'm always just kind of deciding in the moment or like reacting to like making a mistake or something, doing something unexpected. But then a couple times I was watching Mike Dobler play and
I
he
was
would
going to mention him too.
just patch from scratch. And I was like, that was so amazing to watch and to kind of this sonic journey.
Yeah.
And I was like, I really want to do that. I want to, but then of course, like, busy COVID, I haven't done any live performances in a while. So that's
taking the safety rails off. I've seen him perform a few times, and each time I'm just like, I don't know where it's going, and I'm not sure he does either, but he knows how to get there.
Yeah, and it's awesome. Like it's and so that's something I would like to do. Yeah.
Let's see. We only have a few minutes left. I see a question has popped up. Michael Oshman, do you get annoyed by a card when it appears in the deck? A particular card, or just any card in ever?
Not a particular card. I mean, there are definitely scenarios where, like, because I did lots of play testing with it, so it was just sitting down to just play it. And
yes, you weeded out the stuff that really doesn't work already.
A little bit. I mean, and there was some level of like I said, I wanted to keep it there to where it isn't just easy. Like the main purpose of the game is, well, to be fun, but to challenge and kind of like educate and inspire. So it wasn't just always make cool sounds. So there's definitely ones where like I'd be playing and I'd happen across like something really cool and I just want to stop. So and you can stop. There's nothing that says you need to play through all the cards. Whenever you find something that's like great, you've learned something, it sounds good, you want to record it, just stop. At the same time, there's been ones where it's like, oh man, that I don't know that I want to do that. So and that's totally fine too. Like if you draw a card, you don't want to do it. Again, that's fine. There's no real rules to how to use these. I would just encourage people to push into that challenge. Like, you draw something and it's like, gosh, this really sucks. I'm gonna have to do that. Like, unpatch a important module in the system or in the patch.
That you say that, I was noticing these kind of thoughts happening in me while playing the game on the live stream last week. Because at first I was like, we're doing everything, no matter what.
Yeah.
Pull this patch without listening. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. We can't have radio silence here. But then after that, I'm like, we're leaning into everything. I don't care if it's what. But I think once I got to the 40-minute line or so, I started to like the way it sounded so much that if I felt like I was really going to ruin it, I was like, okay.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and there's scenarios too where like if you draw 3 disruptions in a row or something, like that could be pretty rough. Like it's really just starting to tear apart what you just did.
Yeah.
But it's almost like one of those like it's the journey that's really, it's all about the journey and not where you end up kind of thing.
Also, though, I found that it was tearing it apart, but it was tearing it together too. I mean, it was taking me very cool. Like we ended up with a really cool patch, I thought.
It was really awesome to see because it was just sort of like, just watch it. And again, it's because it's been in my head and in the basement in here for like 2 years. So to see people start to do it now and see like all the stuff that I'd be thinking about wanting to do happen, it's just been like one of the most rewarding things. There was one card though, to answer Michael's questions more directly, that was really annoying, and we changed it, and it got way better. And that's the start from scratch or you're done card. So that was originally start from scratch, and that was the one that was like, this is kind of annoying when it comes up because. And really more from just like a time consuming standpoint, it's like, and again, it was one of these ones where it's like, I didn't want it to feel the same every time it came up. So, and there was this level of like, the cards don't really tell you when to be done. So I thought, well, what if we add, I keep saying what if I add just you're done to it? And then suddenly it was like, oh, that was it. That's all that needed.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are past an hour now. I don't think I think we've answered all the questions that popped in. So I think we're in the right spot to kind of wrap it up here. Anyone who for some reason is just this moment joining us, this is James Cigler, has been talking with us about Patch the Card Game, which is available now, or at least available for pre-order. It's already released, but will be available to you as ASAP.
Yeah, in fact, for U.S. customers, it's in stock enough. So if you order now, I should be able to ship it pretty fast. There's a dealer page on patchtcg.com. Check and see if your local dealer's on there. I know Signal Sounds has a pre-order up. Modular 8 has a pre-order up, and I think Nightlife Electronics in Vancouver has a pre-order up.
And I'm putting patchtcg.com on the screen there. Yeah, I encourage everybody to go check this out. It's a lot of fun. This live stream will be available on our YouTube channel in perpetuity, as will last week's live stream where we actually played the game if you missed it. So definitely check both those out and check out patchtcg.com. And James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Fun.
It was an honor to be on the show. I love what you guys are doing with this.
Sweet. Well, and once again, I've mentioned this at the top, but this will be the last office hours for this year because next Thursday is going to be New Year or Christmas Eve, and the following will be New Year's Eve. So I wish everybody who's been tuning in, and I appreciate everybody who's been tuning in. Thanks so much for coming and joining us all these weeks. Happy holidays, happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2021.
Yes, happy end to 2020.
Let's hope so. All right.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for all the questions, too.